This is Paul Mackey with another episode of the One Idjit's Thoughts On podcast. Well, Fox has graduated from high school, and with Iris off at Camp Pillsbury, I figured I should write and record a podcast episode. Last week, I watched both Inside Out 2 and I Saw the TV Glow in theaters, and I personally enjoyed both of them. The latter film was inspired in part by Donnie Darko, as well as the film works of David Lynch, so even without the Buffy-coded TV series at the heart of the movie, it looked to be a Paul movie for certain, and it was. Well, let's go back to an earlier Paul TV show, when he was 10 years old, and look at Whiz Kids Episode 3, Deadly Access, originally aired October 26th, 1983. Brief summary. The kids are preparing to compete in a go-kart race, but Jeremy is disappointed he can't get the kind of times he was hoping for. Richie was hired by Erwin Sanders as a white hat to hack into Garth Chemicals. Just another adult man who Richie has randomly met at the computer store, who his mother barely asks questions about. Ah, the 80s. Alice has taught Ralph how to sing, which is pretty much glossed over by Richie's social awkwardness, but shows to me she has a sharp mind for computers. I was never all that into computers aside from playing games, but it wouldn't have been a simple task to accomplish. Anyhow, she is mad he wasn't obviously impressed and storms off. Jeremy and Hamilton are cross with Richie too. He's supposed to be helping with the go-kart, and he's at home hacking Garth Chemicals. His penetration attempts are being monitored by Carl at the company, and he's telling VP Ted Reichert and Dr. Kathy Fairgate about it, but they are preoccupied with testing chemicals on rats, though later in the scene there's a line showing the testing is on a rather sinister project.
Hey, when are you guys going to stop killing rats and start killing people with that stuff? This whole thing is giving me the creeps.
Carl insists someone is looking into their project, that along with the attempted hacks, someone is following him. But Reichert brushes it all off as paranoia. It turns out, to the audience, someone has in fact been following him. That someone is A.J. Simon, visiting from Thursday nights on CBS, from Simon & Simon in a crossover event. A.J. notes early on that his brother Rick is vacationing in Baja. Richie has a breakthrough and finds his way into the Garth Chemicals system. Sanders agrees to pay Richie $300 at the kart track later that day, but Sanders does not recognize the project and digs in further, seeing the estimate on screen of 19,000 human deaths per 100,000. Sanders reveals what he knows to Reichert and finds out who is in charge of the secret project. Reichert. Reichert leads him down to the lab where Carl has just realized Sanders planted a logic bomb in the system that periodically requires a different password each time that only Sanders knows as insurance against the harm they clearly mean to cause him. At the track, Richie reveals the fiberglass cart shell he is buying with the money from Sanders, but Sanders doesn't show up. The office says he's on a business trip which doesn't square with what he told him that morning, and Richie is concerned. He gets Farley in on it, and Farley agrees to call Quinn. The kids infiltrate Garth Chemicals and run into A.J. Simon. Alice is obviously smitten with A.J., who flirts with her and reveals that he is a PI investigating thefts of chemical compounds for the company. When Richie takes A.J. back to Ralph, A.J. sees the mystery project file and realizes the compounds displayed are the same ones being stolen. He asks Richie to download the files and print them. The bad guys unlock Sanders every once in a while to get the passwords for the logic bomb. A.J. confronts Reichert about Sanders' disappearance, and they take him hostage as well. They didn't get the memo that he's a TV private eye, however, and he and Sanders work to engineer an escape. Reichert leaves Dr. Fairgate to look after Sanders while he sells the product. When Richie starts to download the files at the school, Carl sees it and traces the number in order to try to confront Richie. A.J. and Sanders overpower Dr. Fairgate and escape. Carl tries to get the discs from Richie and Alice, but they work out what's going on, and Richie leads Carl on a chase around the school, culminating in a car versus cart pursuit. Farley arrives and overpowers Carl to save the kids. Reichert counts his giant pile of money and deletes the project from company servers. A.J. stops the buyer at the airport, and when confronted, Reichert correctly states there is no such project on the servers, but Richie still has copies. They install the shell on the cart and win the race. Alice gets one last chance to flirt with A.J., who this time has the decency to look uncomfortable about it. All right, my favorite line is...
Hey, Richie. Are computers going to take over the world?
Computer's just a machine, Farley.
Yeah. But does it know that?
Who is Query? This week was a little challenging picking who to profile because of all the guest stars. We, of course, have the dashing Jameson Parker in the special appearance role as A.J. Simon, crossing over from Simon & Simon. We have Greg Malavi as Mr. Sanders, but we already covered him in the Rockford Files episode Orally Farewell, where he played a much less sympathetic character. We have Richard Anderson as Ted Reichert, who is best known for his role as Oscar Goldman in both The $6 Million Man and The Bionic Woman. And we have Gary Clark as special guest star in the role of Carl Fletcher. Gary Clark didn't seem particularly familiar to me, but apparently he was one of the leads in all 86 episodes of the TV drama Family. However, I'm going to stick with the main cast, as we have plenty of them to go over. This week I will look at the other new cast member from the network changes after the pilot episode. In the role of Lieutenant Neil Quinn, I was surprised to see A. Martinez. Adolfo LaRue Martinez III was born in Glendale, California in 1948 to a father of Mexican and Apache heritage and a mother of Northern European and Blackfeet heritage. As a child, his father was known as Big A, and they called the son Little A, and he continued using the name A into his professional career. He began singing at age 12 and also played semi-pro baseball for 5 seasons. He considered UCLA for political science, but instead turned to acting. A is primarily known as a television actor. A few of his film credits include Powwow Highway, She-Devil, and The Curse of Chucky. On TV, he started out as a character performer in a bunch of the major shows of the 70s, including Mission Impossible, Ironside, Bonanza, The Hardy Boys' Nancy Drew Mysteries, Wonderbug, and The Incredible Hulk. Moving into the 80s, he was in a few more of these type of roles on Quincy M.E., Barney Miller, Chips, Fantasy Island, Heart to Heart, and Remington Steele, just as he was landing his role on Whiz Kids, his first role as a major cast member in a series. Now, when I was a kid, my sister was into the soap opera Santa Barbara, and I watched it with her. It was an offbeat, different show than many other soaps, verging occasionally on zany. But the big romance plot was Eden Capwell and Cruz Castillo, and A played Cruz. In just short of 1,500 episodes, from just after Whiz Kids was canceled through 1992. After that, he returned to character roles mostly, though he has been in recurring roles on Profiler, For the People, CSI, Longmire, and Dark Winds, and smaller runs of episodes compared to Santa Barbara, on General Hospital, One Life to Live, The Bold and the Beautiful, and Days of Our Lives. Most recently, he's been in a couple of live-action adaptations of animated series in Cowboy Bebop and Avatar: The Last Airbender, both on Netflix. All right, that week in tech. Philip Daguerre was always quick to point out that Ralph the Computer was not performed by an actor unlike Whopper in War Games, a distorted recording by John Wood, who also played Dr. Falcon in that movie, nor like Kit in Knight Rider, even less convincingly artificial, as performed by William Daniels. No, Ralph was performed by a Votrax speech synthesis chip. Votrax International Incorporated was originally the vocal division of Federal Screw Works. Federal Screw Works is a Michigan company that began in 1917 and remains to this day a leading supplier of nuts for the American automobile industry. The vocal division was formed in 1970 based primarily on speech synthesis technology created by Richard Gagnon in 1970. In 1974, they released the Votrax chip and spun off as their own company. Votrax chips were pretty much the go-to speech synthesis chips of the 1980s. The speech was programmed using a series of sound portions called phonemes, programmed via hexadecimal code addresses for each speech part. These were not direct text-to-speech products and required a bit of coding to achieve results. I believe the speech screen seen in the episode was an attempt to show a middle ground, where they divided all of the words into discrete syllables, but still in recognizable English spelling. In code, 0F 26, 2A, 2B, 2E, 19, 1F would be the word Votrax. And there'd be a bunch of other coding to regulate speech pace, pitch, and a number of other variables. They were likely using a Votrax Votalker box for the Apple II series, as the main computers used behind the scenes were reportedly an Apple IIe and a Heathkit Zenith Z100. Votalkers released by Votrax in 1984 included that one, as well as an IBM PC version and a Commodore 64 version. Votrax restructured around this time and transitioned into a company primarily concerned with speech synthesis in commercial phone systems. They merged with Finet in 1987, and then the technology was traded along in a series of other mergers and takeovers. In theory, what remains of the company is part of Fiserv Incorporated, though the trademark on the name Votrax expired in 2016. All right, totally 80s, or this aged poorly. Again, this could go in either way as a heading. Reichert took a briefcase full of their nerve agent and sold it to a man in a limousine, played by Len Lesser, a Polish-Jewish-American best known as Seinfeld's Uncle Leo. I found it somewhat tasteful of them to use a somewhat ethnically ambiguous bearded figure as the bad guy, dealing in chemical weapons. I found it somewhat less tasteful that the role was then credited as Arab. Artifactoids. Well, I figured this would be a good place to mention that Simon & Simon was a CBS TV series which ran between 1981 and 1989. It was first piloted in 1978 as Pirate's Key, set in Florida. The series was inspired in part by a request by a CBS exec to creator Philip DeGuerre to create a modern Butch and Sundance story, and in part by a spec script about a divorced couple running a PI agency written by Bob Shane. It's no coincidence that Whiz Kids was created by DeGuerre and Shane a few years later. After the series was piloted, they changed the setting to San Diego. After the first season, the ratings were low, and producing in San Diego was not cost-effective. Production moved to LA while the setting remained San Diego. Also, the show moved to Thursday nights following Magnum PI, with a premiere crossover event that began on Magnum and concluded that same night on Simon & Simon. The rescheduling was a success, and Simon & Simon retained a significant portion of lead-in viewers of the Magnum series. The show starred Gerald McRaney playing Rick Simon, who I most recently saw much younger and clean-shaven on the Rockford Files, and Jameson Parker as A.J. Simon, seen in this episode of Whiz Kids as part of a crossover event. After NBC launched their iconic Thursday night lineup that included The Cosby Show, Family Ties, Cheers, Night Court, and Hill Street Blues, the ratings softened for all of the CBS Thursday night shows. The 1988 WGA strike shortened the penultimate season of Simon & Simon to 16 episodes, and the final season order was limited to 13 episodes, the last of which didn't even air on the network as part of the network run and premiered in the syndication package. So, what worked in this episode? I think they did a solid job at showing an adult storyline with major deadly consequences and getting Richie tangled up in a believable way. They also got all the kids involved with a lighter go-kart chase finale. They were kind of amping up Hamilton liking Alice in this episode. I'm not sure if they were going for a full love triangle between Richie, Hamilton, and Alice, or if they were planning forward for a future development. There's no story without conflict, after all. What didn't work? I suspect this will be the case for all episodes following the pilot, but again this week they used adult characters for almost all the real Jeopardy, and the kids for the lighter elements. Probably better for the concerns of parents, but it lacks the excitement of the pilot, at least as far as involving the kids. Next time we'll be looking at Simon & Simon, Season 3, Episode 5, Fly the Alibi Skies, which, as far as I understand, completes both sides of a character crossover but does not continue the plot from this Whiz Kids episode. I hope Rick gives AJ a real hard time about the 14-year-old girl throwing herself at him. Happy hunting! You've been listening to the One Idjit's Thoughts On podcast, produced by Paul Mackey in association with Nimlas Studios. Any short clips of audio from shows is included under fair use for commentary purposes, and copyright for that content remains with its original copyright holders. The theme song is Too Good by Jack Mangan and is used by his generous permission. One Idjit's Thoughts is produced under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. You can find more episodes of this podcast and many other fine podcasts at nimlast.org. You can contact me by emailing idjitcastpodcast@gmail.com or commenting on episodes at nimlast.org.
Let's make our own memories.
Sure, they kept the speech synthesis real-world contemporary, but I'm pretty sure there was no voice recognition like Richie was implied to be using with Ralph. Heck, even Google Assistant stops me about 25% of the time and tells me my voice isn't recognized. Just add some napkins to the shopping list, damn you.